Today's hearing will be the first in a series of hearings dealing with the critical issue of the radicalization of Muslim Americans.
It was just 2 years ago when New York congressman held hearings in Washington to learn more about what he called the radicalization of Islam in America. Back then, his hearings were accused of demonizing Muslims. And tonight, a local group of Muslims say that they're being demonized every time they try to cross the Detroit-Windsor border. Welcome back to Let It Rip. With us now, a young man who served with pride and honor in the U.S. Navy before becoming a preacher and advocate of the Islamic faith. He's now the executive director of the Michigan chapter of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. Dawood Wallet is here. He is tired of Muslims being unfairly treated. And next to him, an expert in security and self-defense. He's trained police and soldiers in the former Soviet Union, here in the USA and Canada. His book is called Simple Self-Defense Techniques That Everyone Should Know, and he believes that in some cases, profiling can save lives. Lee Shaquette is here. You've already met Taryn Asher, so let's get started. Dawood, this is all started with that big lawsuit. Some Michigan Muslims claiming that they were targeted as they crossed the border. Why do you think that they were unfairly treated?
Well, we're pro-law enforcement. We're for law enforcement doing their job, but we want law enforcement to do their job effectively while respecting civil rights. You know, it's really interesting that yesterday in court, Judge Cohn, he compared the profiling of Muslims coming in the border with New York's notorious stop and frisk program in which young Black and Latinos have been stopped. 90% of the people who were stopped in New York were not found to have committed any criminal activity, yet almost the same percentage of the people were Black and Latinos who were stopped. So it's infringing on civil liberties, and it's really not even effective law enforcement. Same thing with the FBI or CBP questioning Muslims coming back in the country. Do you pray? How many times a day do you pray? What mosque do you go to? It's basically trying to say that there's some sort of criminal predicate to free practice of religion, and there's no correlation at all between how much someone prays and if they're, as a citizen, planning on plotting some sort of attack against our nation.
Of course, the Justice Department would say that they're not unfairly targeting anybody. They're simply asking you about your religion, and that is not an attack. That's simply asking for information.
Well, that's what they say, but we're hashing this out in court. But going back to what I said before, is it a criminal predicate for someone's religion, or if they pray, how many times they pray? Our country is based upon the First Amendment, and there's people since the very founding of this country came here fleeing religious persecution in which governments would try to unfairly target people or try to marginalize people based upon their sincerely held religious beliefs. And it's really it's not the government's business whether someone's a Sunni Muslim, a Shi'i Muslim, whether they make 5 prayers a day or no prayers a day. It's none of the government's business. And not just for Muslims, for Jews, Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, or anyone.
Well, Lee, certainly we all in theory like to think of profiling as being wrong in general. But in some cases, though, profiling can stop crime.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I was actually born in Moscow, used to be former Soviet Union, and I remember that back in the old country, over there, there were no protections on the civil liberties like we have here in America. And KGB over there could listen to a telephone conversation or do just about anything they want without any control whatsoever. Now in America, I agree, we definitely have civil liberties and we don't want them violated. By the same token, when there is credible evidence, when there is some kind of information forthcoming that indicates that there is a threat against the United States, against people who live here, against an airplane or any kind of target that could be chosen, then it's a different story altogether. Then we definitely can do profiling and we can look into the situation, because now really we're addressing the basic job of law enforcement, which is to prevent crime and to protect people and to prevent some of these terrorist attacks that unfortunately have taken place in the past, citing the big one like September 11th, for example. So there are instances.
Now, if we had profiled the 19 people involved in 9/11, could we have caught them?
It's unknown. It is unknown. There is no easy answer to this question. Profiling is not something that gives you an exact address, a name, and a person. It gives you an idea. It's a concept. Sometimes it works in some countries. It is implied right now. Israel, for example, uses profiling. Other countries sometimes use it. The effectiveness of it varies depending on the quality of the information that is available at the time.
Well, there's a difference between sound intelligence gathering and profiling, and I think he highlighted something that's very important. I don't want America to be Russia. I don't want America to be North Korea or Nigeria. We have civil liberties here, and this is what makes this country so great. Number two, if we go by so-called profiling, well, the bogus counterterrorism expert Stephen Emerson said after the Oklahoma City bombing, he said that it had a so-called Middle Eastern trait. But guess what? We know Timothy McVeigh and another white American, they're part of the Christian identity movement. We're involved in that. So if we're going by so-called racial profiling, religious profiling, we have several examples in American history where people have been dead wrong by looking at simply one ethnic group or one religious group.
Taryn, when I look at you, I see a professional woman. I see an accomplished wife and mother, reporter. But what the viewers don't realize or know is that your background is Syrian. Your family is from Syria. And if you were dressed another way, different hairstyle, different accent,
maybe different religion,
then our attitudes toward you would change.
Quite possibly. But the question is right now, are we too politically correct here in the United States that we're not doing enough to maybe protect ourselves, to defend ourselves? And when I say that, we were warned about the Boston Marathon, the older Tsarnaev brother.
And
yeah, so we were warned that this man was a threat. He was not followed. He was still allowed to travel. Do we do enough to profile these people that are coming into our country that might be a threat?
Well, those are American citizens, but that was misplaced resources. Other people were being involved in agents profiling people instead of following the right individuals. Let's use some sound statistical data. Now, according to the Triangle Center, which is ran by Duke University and University of North Carolina, going back to 1980, 94% of domestic terrorism attacks have been committed by non-Muslims. So if we're just going to look at a group of people based upon their religion or their ethnicity, and those were white people, I mean, literally from the Caucasus Mountains. They weren't even from Middle Eastern background relating to Boston. But if we're going to look at religion and we're going to look at who's really committing the terrorism, I don't want us to be politically correct either, because the vast majority of people who have been committing terrorism in America historically are not Arabs, they're not from the Middle East, and not Muslims. They've been predominantly white Americans.
Do you think that the problem is that we hear time and time again, though, when there is a terrorist attack, that these individuals are killing in the name of Allah? Do you think that that's where the problem lies?
We saw it in Boston, according to the testimony taken at the hospital bed from Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. We heard it in the attack in London. A British soldier killed in broad daylight by two men who said they were Muslim and killed in the name of God.
I would say, let me just take that for a minute. I would say that the example, for example, with Boston Marathon bombers illustrates that law enforcement tries always to do the right thing. They try to assess what the information is, and sometimes maybe they should go after certain situation, they should address it, and they try to address it, but they have to have solid, concrete evidence that leads them into that direction. And I would definitely agree that you cannot profile people simply based on whether they're of a certain race or certain persuasion, and the law clearly states that that is not what they're out there to do at all.
But look, you mentioned Israel, the most threatened country in the world, and yet they've had no airline mishap since 1972. They have a law against profiling, and yet they admit they use ethnicity as a part of what they use to catch potential terrorists. In fact, the head of security says, yes, we know that on average, a bomber is more likely to be young and Muslim than a grandmother from Norway. So it makes no sense for us to stop the elderly woman. It does make sense for us to stop that young Muslim who may be trying to board the plane. Now that's profiling, but does it not also make sense in terms of catching the threat before it becomes real?
Some of that is used in this country. For example, when you talk about young people, the statistics shows that young people, the age, let's say, from maybe 19 years old to 30 years old, are more likely to commit certain kinds of crimes. And statistics shows that, and oftentimes it proves to be the fact. So some of this research has been proven useful, and we use it here in this country pertaining again to certain kinds of crimes.
Let's protect ourselves in the First Amendment, and let's paint all people with a broad brush. This is all that we're saying, and we want Muslims to be treated like all other Americans and not to be painted with a broad brush. We are all innocent until proven guilty, and that's the American way.
It is a delicate balance.
Yeah, you got to strike a balance here. That's definitely true.
Well, we thank you so much for your
Thank you.
comments and your insights. Still to come on Let It Rip. Should Detroit city workers be required to live in the city? Charlie Langton takes the show on the road from Mackinac Island next when Let It Rip continues.